I knew what I was going to say, but now I've forgotten. So yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks, Green Team, for putting this all up again. Yeah. So what I want to talk about basically is my desperate efforts to stop using Perl for everything. Really? Who said that? Yeah, I've been a Perl programmer forever, and Alfie and another guy we used to work with kept saying, you should have a look at Rust, you'll really like it, you'll really like it. And as it turned out, I did. And so I've been looking for projects to sort of get my teeth into to learn the language, because you can't just learn a language in isolation. Right? That doesn't exist in a vacuum, so you've got to do something with it. And so I started looking at my place. Is that recording?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. So I was looking at what some of the stuff I've got going on at my place, which is an off-grid house that I built how many years ago now? 5 years ago, I think. Look up. So yeah, I've got my place, which is, turn the keyboard off. That's better. So yeah, I built a house in 2008. Bought a block of land, 105 acres of bush, which is mostly like that. But basically just to get out of the city. I've been living in neighbours' pockets for a long time, and needed some space. I've got 3 kids who, 3 boys, they need some space. So in the end of 2011, I started building, only building a house and garage. Well, it's more of a garage than a house. The house is dwarfed by the garage. Jesse's nodding, yeah. And partly, to get out of the city and give the kids some space, but mostly as protection, insurance against zombies when they finally arrive. So, this keyboard keeps going to sleep. This is more or less where it is. So you can see it's really quite isolated. The place is completely off-grid. There's, when you own a building, you probably want some services, some things might be useful. Power is one thing. Power is always handy to have. Water, can't mix concrete without water. Water's heavy, it's hard to cart around. So it's good to have water. Sewage might be nice. The alternatives aren't really very appealing. Fixed telecoms, something else that might be good. NBN even. Garbage collection, mail delivery, all of these things. If you're going to choose somewhere to build a house, I suggest, maybe you have some of those things. But when the zombies arrive, you're going to have none of them. So, and I've got none of them. This place is literally on a dirt road in the middle of the forest. If you don't know it's there, good luck finding it, because no. So services. So solar powered. We've got a button that doesn't want to work. So a 4 kilowatt PV array. That's it there. Luckily the roof is easily accessible. I can just walk up onto the roof.
So can the goats.
So can the goats. There, thank you for reminding me.
And the zombies.
So, there may be a small flaw in my plan.
If they attack during the day and the power panels are working, you'll be fine.
Yay!
Nighttime zombies are different.
Jeez. Well, that's why I've got a big battery. 76 kilowatt hours of battery, the world's biggest car battery. It's not a car battery, it's lead acid like a car battery. It's exactly the same chemistry, works exactly the same way, but there's 24, I've got a picture of it in a second, there's 24 individual cells. They stand about this tall, each one's 2 volts, and 76 kilowatt hours. I did the maths, because I'd forgotten how much energy that is. And each cell is, I think, 65 amp hours. at 2 volts. So, you know, that's a lot of power. It's a lot of fault current. When the electrician who helped me install it, because I designed the system and I had an electrician come and install it, he took one look at it and went, that's a lot of fault current. You know, you'd be very careful about walking around it with a wrench or something that can conduct across terminals, because it would literally explode. The amount of power that this battery has, it's a lot of power. 76, I mean, the Teslas have 70 odd kilowatt hours of battery in them. So it's a big battery. We collect rainwater off the roof. There's 200 square metres of roof space. So I've worked it out that 1 millimetre of rain collects 1,000 litres. I think something like that. I did the math once, and it's a lot of water. So we collect rainwater. I've got a normal septic system. We compost everything the dogs and the goats don't eat, which really isn't very much. And otherwise live pretty normally. Yeah, so otherwise...
And still no garbage collection, so that was...
There's no garbage collection either. Yeah.
Good for
question.
What about commute?
What about commute? I work remotely. So...
I thought he had a helicopter somewhere.
He hasn't built that yet.
No, there's not quite enough clear space for a helipad.
Right.
I do want to get my pilot's license, but fixed wing, not helicopter. But no, there's no... I have commuted, and I've worked in the city. I've worked in the city for a long time. But I tend to work 50-50 remote and here. And even then, you can catch the train, and it's an hour and 10, hour and 15 on the train when they work, V-lines. And when you think about it, that's about as far away as Frankston is. You know, and you saw where the map is. I'm in the middle of nowhere. But life's pretty normal. Yes, we have to dispose of our own garbage, but there's a service station down the road that has rubbish bins. So we sneak a bag into the service station rubbish bin every once in a while. It's true. Recycling is the big one. That's going to go to the tip. But they take it for free, but it just means then, you know, loading bins up on the back of the ute and making a trip. That's the chore. But aside from that, you know, off-grid living is very normal. You do have to be a little bit careful about energy, but you know, once you've got fairly efficient appliances and LED lights, you can do it. It's pretty easy. That's the battery. Yeah, so there's 24 cells, 2 volts each. They stand about this tall, and it weighs about 1 billion kilograms. I've got a Bobcat, which is how I moved it around. When they delivered those batteries, they came on the back of a truck with a tailgate, and that was it. There was no... he had a pallet jack. There was a pallet full of batteries. He had a pallet jack, but he wouldn't drive down to where the house is, so I had to get... They were basically on the road, which is 400 metres of driveway away. And yeah, so getting them to the house was a challenge because they weigh, like I said, 1 billion tonnes. But yeah, 76 kilowatt hours of fault current. They are connected to this guy. This is, well, I should say, this is, what I've designed is an AC coupled power system. Now there's 2 ways to do, you can probably guess what the other way is. There's 2 ways to do a solar power system, AC coupled and DC coupled. This is an AC coupled system. And I'll go into why I've done that in a little bit. This is the battery inverter. This manages the battery and produces the 240 volt grid that the house runs on. This is what the solar panels are attached to. So this is just a run-of-the-mill grid tie inverter, the sort of thing you could have at your place living on the grid. The trick with these is they have to have grid power in order to operate. They can't just produce 240 volts from the sun. The reason for that is long and involved, but mainly so that when you have one of these on your house and the power goes out and an electrician comes to fix it, you don't kill him with the power you're generating from your solar panels. So that cuts out whenever the grid cuts out, which means this yellow inverter has to produce the 240 volt grid for this to attach to. Pretty cool. So this is the old way of doing solar. ye old solar power, where you have solar panels attached to a charge controller. The charge controller is connected to your battery and charges the battery. Your 240 volts is produced by another piece of equipment, an inverter that takes whatever battery voltage you've got. In the old days, they just used effectively 12-volt batteries. People used to use the old discarded batteries from Telstra, mobile phone sites. Telstra would rotate the batteries out of the mobile phone sites every 18 months, and you can pick them up reasonably cheap. So a lot of people have done that. But you need an inverter to produce 240 volts. But then you've got two separate pieces of equipment. If you want to add a generator, you need another piece of equipment. You need a transfer switch and something to start and stop the generator. If you want to add more solar, well, you're going to need another charge controller. And the two charge controllers may have different charge regimes, and they compete for who's looking after the batteries. And if you want to add solar, what happens if you've got a building a kilometre away? A shearing shed, for example, if you're in the country, like I am, you've got a building a long way away that you want to add solar panels to. You want to integrate into your existing system. Really hard to do with a DC coupled system. And then once you've got all of that, how are you going to talk to all these pieces of technology to nerd out with all the data they can give you? So DC coupled, it's the way that they used to be done, but there's a better way. And that's what this is. So the way that the system's architected is the battery inverter manages the battery. It's the only thing that's connected to the battery, nothing else is. The battery inverter produces the 240 volt grid at air quotes 50 hertz, and I'll explain the air quotes in a minute. But then your solar inverter, so the panel's connected to the solar inverter, then you can attach to that grid. Advantages of this: during the day, all of the household loads are powered directly by the panels. The battery doesn't get involved. This other inverter doesn't get involved. Once the electricity is generated, it's used by either the battery inverter to charge the batteries or whatever loads you have in the house. The other advantage of this system is the battery inverter has two 240 volt inputs, as it were. One is the grid that it produces, but the other could be the power grid. You could do this connected to the power grid. And instead of having a diesel generator, you hook that up to your grid. In my case, there is no grid. The nearest power pole from my place is like 5 kilometres away, and they wanted SPIs. They wanted $10,000 a pole.
A pole.
Yeah, because they would have had to clear an easement through the forest and get guys with bigger balls than I've got in to do it all. So yeah, they wanted a lot of money to do it. It was much cheaper to set up solar. So I've got a diesel backup because you really need it, especially in winter in Victoria. Solar energy is not that bountiful. So anyway, so this inverter, the yellow inverter, can be grid attached. So if you want, you can do this on your own house. You still have to pay for being attached to the grid, but it can do it. But one of the other advantages of this system is that if you whoops, come back, double click. One of the advantages is that because everything works on this 240 volt bus effectively, you can add more solar panels and another inverter a kilometre away. If you string your 240 volts, however far, like I'm going to be building a carport. And I'm going to put solar panels on the roof of the carport because roof space, put solar panels on. And I don't have to worry about proximity to the battery for the charge controller. I just add another grid tie inverter, which, because they're grid tie inverters, they're really cheap. They're made in mass. They're pretty cheap. So you can just expand the solar without touching the rest of the system. Yeah, and the other advantage is I've got effectively two devices to talk to here. to gather all the instrumentation and automate and to do all the automation. I've only got 2 devices to talk to. These red inverters. Those red inverters have Bluetooth, which is really convenient. So I can connect to those. I use an open source project that runs on a Raspberry Pi. It's just compiled for a Raspberry Pi. It connects to the red inverters using Bluetooth and gathers the solar PV data. So this is the data that comes off those, and this basically is how much sunlight we see and how much electricity we're generating from the sun. On a grid tie system, this looks like a bell-shaped curve. This is the line where this is the solar irradiation and the power we're generating. And a grid tie system, that's a bell-shaped curve. With this off-grid system, it's not, and I'll explain that in a moment. So the really cool way about the way these inverters work is that the red grid tie inverter is designed to be attached to the grid. Now, how much energy should it produce? Now, being grid tied, it'll produce as much as it can because the grid soaks it all up. But when you're off grid, you only produce the energy that you can use. Right? If you produce more energy than you can use, where's it going to go? You can't do it, right? So these 2 inverters, the battery inverter, the yellow one, and the red PV inverter, have to have some way of talking. And there's no data connection between the 2. The way they talk is with the grid frequency. So the yellow inverter that produces the grid, and this is what happens too on the main, the power grid. When there are times of demand, so when demand exceeds supply, the frequency of the grid drops a little bit. Right? And if you think about the load that you're imposing on a generator, think about a diesel generator, right? If you've got a diesel generator that's spinning at 1,000 RPM, and there's no load on it, right? It's going to spin at 1,000 RPM, it's going to produce 50 hertz. Once you start putting a load on that, it's got the generator's got to respond to that load. So what happens initially is the revs will drop when you put it under load. It's like climbing a hill in your car, right? So what do? You respond to that by giving it more fuel, and the revs come back up again. But that initial sag in the revs, it's exactly what happens on the grid now, but at a much larger scale. When load exceeds supply, the frequency drops. When supply exceeds the load, the frequency rises. If you have a look at OpenNEMO, you'll probably be able to see this data. I haven't looked for it, but it's probably there. And you'll be able to see the grid frequency fluctuations throughout the day and how the generators on the grid respond to that. It's pretty interesting stuff. Anyway, the same principle applies to an off-grid system. When there's, I'm trying to figure out the term. When there's more supply than there is demand, the frequency rises. When there's more demand than there is supply, the frequency drops. So at this point in time here, it's like 10 in the morning. I've got about 92% battery charge. So we need to produce power to charge the battery. We want to get it to 100%. So, and there's other loads in the house that there may be like 300 or 400 watts of steady state load in the house with all my Raspberry Pis. And the fridge and the freezer and my vibrating chair. I don't have a vibrating chair. So at this point at the time, this point at the time of day, the system is producing a 50 hertz grid, which basically tells the inverters produce all the power you can, right? And they do that. So here we're producing 2,000 watts. A little later in the day, the grid frequency is still about 50 hertz. 49.99 is basically where it sits when the system wants more power from the solar panels. At this point here, the battery's reached what they call flow charge. 95% is about flow charge. So it's effectively fully charged, and it just wants to be trickle charged from this point. So what's happening now is the battery inverter raise the grid frequency, and once it gets above about 51.5 hertz, the red inverter just backs off its output. And you can see that happening here. So once the grid frequency rises, the output will drop. So we're still at 51.79 hertz here. The batteries, this effectively peters off into a tail like that. These peaks that you can see here, it's probably me boiling the kettle or putting the dishwasher on.
Compiling.
Or compiling Rust, yeah. So those peaks are when there's more demand in the house, and you can see fairly clearly when the sun falls off the solar panels. It's easier to see in the winter because it just goes boom down to the ground. So this is all on PD output. This is I've got a tab always open because I'm just anal about looking at this. And so that's all scraped over Bluetooth. Question?
Yeah, sorry, I just wasn't clear. So the battery never gets charged to the generator. The generator is absolute backup, right? It's all to do with solar, right? That is?
Not necessarily. Battery, we're in the middle of winter, so really June, July are the only months that I really need the generator. And I've got a charge regime set up where I've got the system configured so that if the battery charge drops below about 60% state of charge, I start the generator. Right, and I do that to protect the battery. Right, it's an expensive, it's $15,000 worth of lead acid. Right, so you're meant to get about 10 years of life out of the battery. I'm shooting for 15, and I'm doing that basically by burning a bit of diesel instead of drawing the battery down the road. The chemistry in the battery basically is that it's the same as a car battery. Once you discharge a car battery all the way, you never get full capacity back out of it again, because what happens is a little bit of the sulfur comes out of the electrolyte and deposits on the plates, and it never fully is released back into the electrolyte. So it's called sulfation that happens on the battery plates. And so rather than allow the battery to get down to 0% charge, I never let it get below 50. And the way I do that is by starting the generator when that happens. And so the generator will output, again, it's the same principle, it'll output as much energy as the system's asking for. So when the battery is at 60% charge, it's going to want as much power as it can get to charge the battery and to power the loads on the house.
And sorry, just to slightly follow up, and so you could have situations where the battery is full and there's no demand, therefore the power is just not like just like you're just wasting like whatever the sun's producing, right?
Yeah.
No, it's a story.
I mean, it's effectively wasting. Yeah, we're just not producing. We're not producing electricity.
Not collecting.
Yeah, we're just not producing electricity.
Do you do any demand scheduling? Oh, now would be a really great time to turn on the dishwasher and the washing machine.
Especially in winter. This time of year, anywhere from October through to May, don't have to worry about it. There's more sunlight. There's more power available than we can possibly use. But in the winter months, yes. If it's sunny, that's a good time to put the washing machine on. Because that saves the load on the battery. So I try and protect the battery as much as possible. So if we can generate power from the solar panels, we do put loads on.
They'll probably draw on the line too for that.
What's that?
They'll
Exactly
draw
right.
on the line.
Yeah. It's a nice coincidence. Yeah.
But even in the winter, we don't run the generator every day. Like even with 3 kids, we leave the lights on and, are in the fridge, every 5 minutes and got a Vive running and a PC running and this charging and that charging. We run the generator once a week, maybe?
Yeah, once or twice. The way that the system's sized is that, lead acid 76 kilowatt hours. I don't discharge it less than 50%, so I've really only got 38 kilowatt hours of charge available to me. 38 kilowatt hours. If I use, say, 10 kilowatt hours a day, that gives us effectively 3 days of autonomy, what we call autonomy. If there's no sunlight for 3 days, then the battery can go from 100 to 50%. Like I said, I don't allow the battery to discharge that far. I'll start the generator before it happens, and that's all automated. But I forgot what the question was, and so
conceivably, if the zombie apocalypse starts in the start of winter and you can't get more diesel, you could be in trouble.
well, not with the shotgun.
Power-wise.
Power-wise, well, yeah. So anyway, this data all comes over Bluetooth, which is really nice. However, I'm really interested in this area under the curve here, which is the battery charge. There's no way to get that except from this guy. Now this is a remote control unit for the entire system. So this is how you program it, this is how you get stats on it. This sits on the wall in the kitchen where it's immediately visible so that you can see what the system's doing. It's the only place you can get key pieces of information like battery charge, the state of charge, the load that's on the system, or what the generator is putting out. There's no other way. There's no other place in the system to get this sort of data. Turns out it's connected to the yellow inverter over Cat5. So must be doing something, you know. Turns out it's RS485, which, you know, industrial control, of course it is. But it's completely undocumented. SMA, who produce these inverters, they will sell you a box for monitoring all of these parameters, and it's like $500 or something. Of course, who wants to spend $500 when you can reverse engineer it? So yeah, I'm a glutton for punch. So yeah, they will sell me a box which goes on the web, and you can hit it with a web browser, and that's no fun at all. But it turns out the RS485 is completely undocumented. But being RS485, what you can do is vampire tap it. Right? It's a bus. You can tap into it. And so these are the key pieces of information that I can get via RS485. So there's the state of charge. There's the charge and or discharge rate. Now the arrow is pointing to the loads, and a negative 0.4 kilowatt load means the battery's charging 0.4 kilowatts. In this diagram here, the solar panels are over here. Right, so what this is telling me is the power's going that way, into the battery. Oops, wrong button. The generator status, that's this little transfer switch icon there. That flicks up when the generator's connected and flicks down when it's not. It's not any character set you've ever seen. It's drawn, these are custom glyphs drawn. I think that's character 01. The G and L, the reversed letters, again, custom glyphs. And the generator status and its output. This is what you get over the RS485. Some of it's recognizable. You can see, you can see bits and pieces in here, percentages and kilowatts, but it's not straightforward.
So how are you pulling out that data from, like, so do you have that connected to your computer, or cool.
Yeah, so I've got a Raspberry Pi in the cupboard, where I vampire tap the RS485, and it's just got an RS485 daughter board on it. As it turns out, that little remote control box with the green screen on it, that's powered by the inverter, so it runs 12 volts over that Cat5. But it's really sensitive about the voltage. It will only take between 11.95 and 12.05 volts. So you've got to have a really nicely regulated power supply, and any voltage droop over a long run, they say you'll get 30 meters out of it. That's bullshit. This thing's not 30 meters of cabling away from the inverter, but I have to basically mid-span inject power into when I vampire tap it in order to get the box on the wall to light up. So this is what you see when you sniff the serial bus RS485, and yeah, you can basically see that there's recognizable patterns in there. Yeah, how do you get through this? Just good old-fashioned reverse engineering. But it turns out it's PPP framing. Now I didn't know this when I first did it. I didn't recognise that it was PPP, but it turns out it's just PPP framing. I was googling some of the hex strings, and then I got some results back and looking at PPP. I'm like, what? Can't be PPP. No way. Anyway, it turns out it is. It's very basic. I mean, there's no PPP features here. It's just, in fact, there's a lot of fields in there that I literally don't know what they do. But
Sorry, what's PPP?
Point-to-point protocol.
Ah.
It's clearly you're showing your age.
Yeah.
Or lack of
Well, I don't do much embedded programming. So.
Well, forget embedded
It's
programming.
not
Are you on the
internet?
internet?
Yes, I am.
If you are connected to the internet, you're using PPP.
Oh, cool.
Have you ever heard the PPPoE, PPPoA?
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
Those are running PPP over Ethernet or over ATM.
Conveniently old analog phone protocol.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, if you know trumpet Winsock.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few of you.
Now you're showing your age.
You know, I'm showing-
You didn't
So,
look
yeah.
that old.
What's that?
So you didn't look that old.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, so it turns out it's PPP. I never thought somebody would ask what PPP is.
Sorry.
I also did.
Don't worry, don't worry.
I was
Oh. Well, it's called point-to-point protocol. If you have a modem of any kind, you're using PPP. So what do you do when you're a crusty old hack like I am? You try and do this in Perl. This was my first attempt. Shut up. I know you. I know you. Oh, this was attempt number one. Before I knew it was PPP or what I was looking at, I just saw patterns. And what do when you want to parse patterns? You write a regular expression. Wrong. Don't write a regular expression for this stuff. There's better ways. But that is what I had initially. It's all wrong too. Like this is the start. This is the header start, and that's the header finish. And I've got all this junk around it, and it's just not good. This was attempt number 2, which is a little better, but still, why are you using regular expression to pass patterns? It's a dumb idea. There's better ways. Wait. There's better ways. And this is where Rust, this is where it comes in. I started programming in C. So, you know, the idea of headers and structs and like, it's all, like, this is to me, I mean, there's better ways than this, but to me, I see a packet format and I go, there's a header, right, that's a structured, that's a struct, right, I can just grab a bunch of bytes off the wire, put them in a struct, and I can access those struct fields, right? And I could have done this in C. Maybe I should have done this in C. But that wouldn't have given me an opportunity to give this awesome Rust talk. So I tried it in Rust, and I'm partially regretting it, but partially not. Anyway, so like I said, I think like a C programmer. So that's the first thing. I've got my packet. The packet's got a header and a payload and a checksum. You'll notice the underscore on the front of the checksum. That's bad. It's because I'm ignoring it. You know, you're all Rust guys. You know that. I should be checking the checksum, but I'm not. That's a problem for future. Here we have my header. Now, the earlier versions of this code, even like 2 days ago, I've updated a lot of these to match the PPP nomenclature, because this is a PPP header. Actually, some of this stuff, I think from about there down, is specific to this application. But flag, address, control, protocol, version, I think they're all part of PPP.
Yeah, so I was just you kind of answered the question, but you basically didn't have to reverse engineer. Once you know that it was a PPP, you just looked up what the bytes were, like, correct?
Well,
or is there something else after the header that you don't know, you still got to figure out, okay?
yeah.
Did you try Wireshark or something to analyze the packet?
No. Actually, that's a really good idea. I should have done that. I should have Wireshark, and it would have told me, this is PPP for you. Here's your headers. Ah, I hate that. But this is why I come here, to learn stuff from smart people like you. You know what, I'm going to go home, and I'm going to grab a data dump, and I'm going to give it to Wireshark and see what they said. It's, goddamn, months this took me, months. Anyway, so. Starting to get a little bit small now. I thought this projector would be like this big, but it's not. So the way I'm doing this, again, I'm thinking probably too much like a Perl programmer and not enough like a Rust programmer. I see some smiles and nods. I know it. I know. I've got to do better than this. But the way I had implemented this in Perl was with a hash, because that's what we do everything. Everything in Perl goes into a hash. What I'm doing is this little program that I've written sniffs this data off the RS485 bus and injects it into MQTT. MQTT is a message bus for those who don't know what it is. And that message bus is the core of the entire home automation. So it's a publish-subscribe system where you pump messages in on a certain topic, and if somebody's subscribing to that topic, they'll get that message out the other end. Most of the messages may go into the void if nobody's interested in them, but you just publish messages into this broker, the message broker, and anybody who subscribes to those gets those messages. So all the data that I'm scraping off the RS485 goes into MQTT as various keys or topics. And really, to my mind, the easiest way to set that up was with a hash. You know, you have a global hash, and every time you read data off, you put another value into the global hash, overwrite the one that was there previously, and periodically take that hash, turn it into MQTT keys and values, and dump it on the MQTT bus. So that's the approach that I've taken. At the moment, it's synchronous. It's even badly synchronous. Things like, you know, once I've read a chunk off the wire, I publish what I've got to MQTT. So I'm going to smash MQTT here because the data's coming in at 115,000 bits per second. So, you know, I need to set this up to only publish on a schedule. Now, I've spoken to a couple of people about this the last time I was here. The way that I have done stuff like this in Perl in the past is with an event loop and with timers and with, you know, you subscribe to a file handle, and when data is available on the file handle, your event fires, and you read data, and when your timer fires, you can output to your MQTT bus. That's really hard to do in Rust. TOC.io, no, it's not hard. Yeah, I found it really hard to do in Rust. TOC.io and async in Rust, and the lifetimes were kicking my ass.
Did you look at crossbeams time?
I haven't had a chance. Yeah, I know you mentioned crossbeam, but I haven't had a chance to look at that. I started writing this talk just after the last meetup, and I was going to put the crossbeam into this, but I kind of finished the talk not very long ago, and so I never got to doing it. So the main loop basically just reads data from the port into a chunk of memory. Once we know we've got something, we append it to a buffer, and then try and decode that buffer. Now in this case here, there's probably too many mutables. I'm passing mutable references around where it probably shouldn't be. But this buffer here is truncated. Once we've passed packets out of it, the buffer's truncated. So when we come back to this, it's you know, everything lines up on a packet boundary. So yeah, so we decode into our status hash map and then publish the hash map. This is what the regular expression turned into. I'm now, well, it's better because I'm testing headers, the fields in a header. I'm testing the values to make sure that it's the kind of packet that I'm expecting to see, because it turns out this thing produces more than just PPP packets in one direction. The little knob on the control box generates packets in the other direction, which have different type fields, and so this one here, if header mode is B, this is a display update. It's basically data coming into the remote from the inverter. I haven't fully figured out, and you were asking before about, you know, did you need to reverse engineer anything else? Well, yeah, the protocol that these guys are running over PPP is proprietary and undocumented. So what I'm doing is now, I'm not so much reverse engineering the entire packet, but the payload that is inside the PPP frame. So yeah, just by observing what happens on the wire when I fiddle with knobs and you know, I've sort of reversed engineered it down to this. So yeah, there's basically, this is detecting the start of a packet. I won't go through it all. But basically, once I've got once I've got the terminator. It's in here somewhere. I produce a packet, push it onto a list, and then return that list once I've exhausted the buffer that I've been handed. Truncating the buffer to the point that I'm up to, so that the next read just appends to the partial packet that's at the end of the buffer that I've already got. Only, what's this?
Yeah.
Unsaved. Yeah. Oh, I saw that too, yeah. Again, this is me thinking as a C programmer. I've got to stop thinking as a C programmer and start thinking as a ROS programmer. There's better ways to do this.
I saw your repo C hack on the
Yeah.
to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was coming.
You knew it was coming. Yeah. There's better ways to do it than this. This is me just taking a piece of memory and mapping it onto the structure. Obviously, that's unsafe in Rust because you can trample memory doing this, and it's don't do this. But I'm still easily a Rust novice, and so I'm still trying to get my head out of being a Perl and a C programmer and into being a Rust programmer. Things like a better way to do this would be with codecs, top-out codecs perhaps. There's a few screwed up faces, maybe not.
Is it I'm trying to just trying to use to say get around with the follow check or something like that?
Sorry, to get around with what?
I don't understand say why you need to use this conversion. Is it because
This here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's what the compiler told me to do.
Was to try to find the follow checker, but usually in my experience that is usually not necessary. So maybe if I can look at your code.
Please, it's on GitHub. If you want to send me a pull request, please do.
Yeah.
So what type is header? The original header?
Yeah, that's my struct that I've defined as header. So
But what's the other, like you're doing header as const?
yeah. Let me see if I can go.
Is that like a bytes or something?
No, it's a cast.
Yeah, it's a cast because the
type of
chunk in a buffer of the bytes.
So
Yeah, that's right.
So in here, so that is where I'm grabbing a chunk of what's been handed in.
Okay, so you're technically just converting the data type.
Yeah.
Mem transfer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm basically mapping a chunk of data I get off the wire onto my struct, so that I can.
It's a class.
I think they have to be that way.
Yeah. Anyway, there's better ways. I'm sure there's better ways because I should be able to do this without being unsafe, but I haven't figured it out yet.
No.
I will, but not yet. As I said before, I want to do this with async methods, so that I have an async reader on the serial port that gets fired when data arrives, and I want a timer that happens independently, so I'm not, bombarding MQTT with updates unnecessarily. I've tried doing it with Tok.io, but the lifetimes are killing me. Lots of reasons it's killing me, but oddly one of them is the use of a command line parser. I can't remember what I was using now. I didn't include it in the slides, but I've got static strings that it says need a longer lifetime, but I've forgotten why I can't do it now, but it's been kicking my ass, and so I've basically given up on async for the moment and just tried to make this as clean as possible. I'm still stored by regular expressions. But this is the right use case. We've got a string now, a string of data that has a known format, but things can vary by a space here or there. There might be a minus sign, there may not be. This is the use case for a regular expression. So I finally found something that I can use my Perl for. Nice thing about Rust too is it's broken out of regular expressions. It's great. You have to learn something new. This is probably all unnecessary. I haven't distilled this down, but there's so much unwrapping and wrapping and collecting and as bytes and nodes. There's probably way too much going on there than there needs to be. Again, I'm just doing what the compiler tells me at this point. There is another piece of code somewhere that literally just distills this down to 2 lines. So I just need to figure out why the compiler is bitching at me so hard about this particular one. But what this allows me to do now is I can capture on this particular line, because inside this proprietary format, there's helpfully a row variable, or a field in the packet that tells me which row this update, this packet refers to. And so in this case, row is 2, which is everything.
Are they literally
zero
sending screen lines for the display editor?
Yep.
That's why you were seeing strings.
Yep.
Because my other suggestion was going to be point a camera for the Raspberry Pi.
That's too agricultural. I've got kids and or like the failure modes. There's too many failure modes for that. So yeah, I've got a string now. I can apply a regular expression to it. You know, the captures match. You know, this is my generator output. I can put that in here, a particular key. This then goes to MQTT as, you know, genset/output. I can subscribe to that. I can use that somewhere else in the system. So yeah, I finally found a way to use regular expressions in Rust. That's the right way. Yes. But then finally we published to Mosquito for MQTT, which, like I said, just slash. It produces a path. The key is a slash separated path. Which is why I ended up using a map to store these things in, because the map key could be a path component for MQTT, and I could just output it rather than do all this jiggery pokery. So yeah, that's the last step. Now, where does this data go? I keep talking about MQTT and how it's a message bus and it's sent into the system. But, that's the last of the Rust too for, like, it's my bad Rust, you all see it now. So, this is what consumes the data that I put onto MQTT. This is an automation framework called Node-RED. It's not written in Rust. You can guess what it's written in. It's actually really quite powerful and very, very easy to manage and configure. That screen grab there is literally the configuration. All of these lines that you draw from place to place, they are paths for messages. So if you want to hook something up to something else, you just draw a line. So yeah, that basically represents most of the automation in my house. There's another page which deals with the generator and auto starting and, you know, things like that, like using the battery level, the state of charge, to start the generator. So when the generator gets below, you know, a certain level, I can use automation to start the generator. I don't need to do it with Node-RED. There is a way to do that with the inverter itself, that it can control it. It's what does the starting and stopping of the generator. But I can shed load when the battery gets low. So we've got you know, a turtle aquarium. I've got reptiles for the kids that all have heaters and lights and whatever. And the reptiles will live if it's dark. So if the battery is really low, I just turn the heater and the lights off. They'll survive. They've gotten this far. They don't need automation to help them move further. So this is what consumes. Yeah. So everything revolves around the MQTT bus. A lot of the automation is done with ESPs and 433 megahertz RF transmitters. I've got a lot of, you get them at Bunnings or at Officeworks, remote switches that you get with a little remote control. They're all 433 meg OOK, on-off key, which is even more primitive than AM. It's basically, it switches a carrier. Alfie, you'll probably appreciate this because you're looking at radio stuff, but it doesn't modulate data over a carrier. It's like Morse code.
Wow.
It just switches a carrier on and off. It's the most primitive thing ever. Really susceptible to noise. Jess will tell you, it doesn't always work. I've literally got a remote switch on the aquarium and one on the TV that are separated by a space of 2 meters. The aquarium works all the time. The TV, 50%. Don't know why. I've got a transmitter in the cupboard upstairs, so I've got good range of this, because with 433 megs, a fairly low frequency, it penetrates walls, but it doesn't penetrate around this thick, which is what I've got in my house. And so I've got a few of these things placed around the building to relay these signals, but for some reason, some of them work, some of them don't. Those ESPs as I said, I can trigger events based on battery state. Those ESPs, unfortunately, are programmed in Lua. If anyone knows, is there a Rust cross-compiler for ESPs? There is?
It's complicated, yeah.
It's always complicated.
Basically, the SoC they use in the ESPs has only recently gone LLVM support.
Right.
Which means Rust has been held up on that. They're slowly making progress, but it's still a while off.
Honestly, cross-compiling, I've struggled to get this to cross-compile for the Pi. Like, I talk about how I'm using Rust to do this. I'm not actually using Rust yet because I haven't successfully cross-compiled this thing for the Pi. I know it works because I've got the data in and I know it produces MQTT output. But I've not yet successfully been able to compile this and run it on a Pi. So, yeah, I'm a fake, that's it. Talk over.
What are the errors that, what is the problem with cross-compiling? Did you find some binary?
I got as far as, I had Rust installed, I'm using a Mac, you'll see here. I had Rust installed from Homebrew, which was great, I could do everything I need. And then I'm Googling around, how do I cross-compile? Oh, it's here, here's my Docker container that I use for cross-compile. I don't want to do that shit. People told me Rust can do this really easily, you just use a new target, right? So I'm Googling that. Oh, I need Rust up. Okay, great. Download and install Rust up. Oh no, you have to uninstall Rust. You can't install Rust up when you've already got Rust installed. Alright, fine, okay. I'll uninstall Rust and uninstall Rust up. It installs its own version of Rust. Great, now I've got Rust up, target, add, and I know what target to add. I can add a target. Great, I've done that. It worked. Downloaded the right target. Right, now cross-compile with a target. Nope. Don't have a linker.
Oh yeah.
You don't have the target lips?
Hmm?
Do you have the target lips?
I don't know. I've not been able to find enough tutorial. I've only been doing this part of it for the last few days in a desperate attempt to make this work on a Pi before I gave this talk.
One suggestion, use the Musel target rather than the GFC.
Anyways, I have...
Yeah, I saw that. I didn't try it. I should have tried it.
I have successfully running Rust in my Raspberry Pi. It's not the latest one, it's the Raspberry Pi 2.
Oh, this is
gig.
This is ARM 6, so the one.
Okay, so there's
it's an early one.
The old one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is because it has very limited memory. Unfortunately, there's very hard to implement it.
Yeah.
But I guess we can try to use a Raspberry Pi 2 to cross-compile. That would.
Oh, that sounds
that
like fun.
make it easy. I think that would make it easy.
Yeah, make it easier. Yeah. Maybe I'll just upgrade the Raspberry Pi to a Pi 2, and it's just.
Yeah.
That sounds cheaper and easier to me.
I can say that Raspberry Pi 2 is much better for us.
Yeah. And it's also running like MariaDB and a few other things on it. Pi's probably shouldn't be the database server.
If you're compiling something big, Raspberry Pi 2
Pi's shouldn't be compiled.
Yeah.
I honestly, the first thing I ever tried to do was compile this on the Pi, and that was a rabbit hole I wasn't diving into. That was not much fun.
I was hoping someday we can together have a tool that this CC, so you can distribute the compiling programs to our different machines.
Yeah.
If we have this thing for Rust, it would be very good.
Yeah, it sounds like a solved problem for C, but yeah, we need to solve that for Rust. Anyway, so yeah, I've also got a mobile web app for this that I can't show you because I'm not attached to the house. But yeah, I can basically, my kids hate me because I can turn the internet on with my phone. It's the only way to get the kids to do anything other than sit on their iPads, is literally turn the internet off so they can't do anything. What I've told them is the protection that I've got is not complicated. There's no encryption, there's no authentication. Figure out. If you can figure out how to turn the internet on, I'll leave it on. Do you think any of them have bothered?
Encouraging hacking, yes.
No.
Just tether off their phones now, right? I'll just tether off their phones.
Well,
They can't rule anything.
What's that?
How can they reverse engineer if they can't rule anything?
I'm planning.
How? I didn't have Google when I started.
No.
I had a basic machine that sat there with a flashing prompt at me. I watched it for a while. It was fun. It changed colours. But I had to learn to program. I didn't have Google. So why can't they do it? It's instant gratification. Kids want instant gratification. It doesn't work on their iPad. They're not interested. So yeah, I've got a little light that I can just turn shit on and off. The internet's the fun one. That's yeah. I think that's about all I had.
Cool.
That's more or less where you'll find me when the zombies arrive. on the veranda with a shotgun, waiting for the zombies.
Waiting for the sun to come out.
Waiting for the sun.
So you can try to
Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Any questions?
Where's Peter?
Pizza's definitely on its way, so please do.
Any other questions?
Well, that's a great sort of challenge you've got. I didn't think you were going to involve so many little bits and pieces.
There's a lot of little bits and pieces in this house, yeah.
Before the talk, I had a quick look on the GitHub to see if I could see anything. Well, you said it's there, but that's one of my deficiencies. I couldn't see it, so we can have a look in a minute.
Yeah.
Because I'm a Rust novice as well, but there's a lot of little bits and pieces. I start really small and then integrate and build up so piece while satisfaction guaranteed each time, but it's a small piece. So yeah, you've got lots of bits there that I'm hungry to get, pick at.
Well, I mean, the Rust isn't complicated. There's not a lot. This is one small piece of the entire house. I started out with. I mean, the reason I went down this rabbit hole to begin with was because when I built this house, and I'm not a builder. I'm just a guy with a laptop who doesn't know any better. When I built the house,
did you have to Google to build it?
No, actually I did. I found a framing manual, and I found this, and I found that online. Like, you can find a lot of stuff.
Didn't you use Google to design it with the, what is it,
SketchUp? SketchUp, yeah, that was Google at the time.
Yeah.
No, I did. I've got a full 3D model of this whole place in SketchUp, which is actually how I built the house. I built it in SketchUp first, and then took drawings from SketchUp, and then to the site, and then built that. I made all my mistakes in the virtual world before making them in the physical world. So thankfully, there's not that many physical building mistakes in the house, because I sort of got those out of the way in SketchUp. But one of the mistakes I made, which I didn't draw in SketchUp, was wiring. I've got a concrete slab which is part suspended and part on ground, and where it's suspended, overhead, I didn't put wiring in there for the lights for the room underneath it. And it wasn't until I sort of got in there and I had the roof on going, it's really dark in here, and I didn't actually make an allowance for lights. And so I started figuring out, well, I can try and chase wires through this the ceiling material, but that's going to be messy. And what I ended up landing on was trapeze lighting, which is, if you've seen them in restaurants, 2 stainless steel wires with lights on them. Those stainless steel wires are 12 volts. They're insulated.
Really?
Right. But then you just hang the wires, the lights on them, and they've got little vampire taps that you tap into the wire. And there's a transformer on the other side of the wall that produces 12 volts.
So you're going from 12 volts to 240 and back to 12.
No, I'm going from 48. Or actually, I'm going from 400 to 240. No, but these are 12 volts. But there's a transformer behind the wall, but how do you turn that on? Oh, maybe I need a remote switch. That's how I ended up going down the rabbit hole. I needed a remote switch, and so how do you do this? Well, at the time there was this thing called what's it called? Ninja block. They went broke, which left me a little bit orphaned with this requirement in my house. Like, I have to be able to turn these lights on and off, and I was doing it with a Ninja block. And that was all cloud-based service too. This is before I had no grid set up. That was cloud-based, and then when they went under, they said, "We'll keep the cloud running, we promise." And they didn't. And when you can't turn your bedroom light on because the cloud's down, you've got to do something about this.
And let me get it clear, you still don't have fixed telephones?
I still don't have fixed telephones. Not only when you rely on the cloud, but that cloud is accessed over 4G, which is subject to the weather and to the ISP and to the backhaul from the base station, and just
So it's not really the zombies that...
All the zombies work for Telstra.
Oh yeah, that reminds me of the pet feeder. There was a pet feeder that was connected to the IoT cloud, and when the cloud went down, the pets didn't get fed.
Yeah. Well, I've everything in this house now is off grid, the internet grid. So it's all.
It's an intranet of things, not
It's an intranet of things. Yes. Yes, it is. I'll send you the rules. It's an intranet of things. So it's not dependent on being connected. I can't turn the internet off from here, which, when you think about it, it's probably a good thing. How do you turn it back on again?
Have you seen the Sonoff devices?
Solve yourself, sorry?
No, there's Sonoff and there's
Sonoff.
SONO. They're new, they work on Wi-Fi, sort of, that you can do main switching and...
I've got some LifeX lights.
Yeah, they're similar. No, these are different, just for like main
The
switching.
Sonoffs are an ESP8266.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway,
nice.
in a box. Yeah, $7 each off AliExpress.
Yeah, they're very inexpensive.
And there's a guy here that's importing them and got them Victorian electricity certified.
Oh, nice. I don't care about that.
You got a link for that?
Yeah. There's about 15 different projects on GitHub that have got alternate firmware and
Sonoff.
S on off.
S.
S-O-N.
Yeah,
O-F.
Yeah, I know the name.
Yeah.
Sonoff project.
Yeah. And they've got two-way ones and four-way ones, and they've got ones with current sensors so you can measure consumption as well.
Yeah. Well, that's really handy too, because like when you turn your TV off and you sense the current, you can seriously, you can slave other devices to that. So, you turn the TV off, it turns the PlayStation off. Which is important when you've got no power. All of these things, vampire, they suck power for no reason whatsoever. Like I said, I've got like 400 watt base load. I really don't know where that 400 watts goes. But it's there, Actually, it's probably less than that. It's probably only 150. When I turn everything off and go to bed, that little box reads about 0.1. I never see it 0, which means it's always above 100 watts. There are parasitic loads in there. So.
Do you by any chance collect the data, just any data in your house, like how much been used and you showed that plot, but
I don't have consumption data.
Yeah, that would be kind of interesting because you could sort of maybe figure out that the PlayStation's been on for a bit too long or stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't have logging of consumption data because there really isn't anything that gives me that other than that, it's on the
But
feed.
is there a way to collect off the PowerPoint how much a particular PowerPoint consumed? Can you do that kind of collection, or is that not? Is that
That's where you want
the wrong way?
That's where you want the consumption of like some of
Yeah.
yeah. There's a Wemo one. There's a few others that do that. So it's cool.
Yeah, nice.
But,
So
but you have a BMS as well, right?
yeah, well that big yellow inverter you saw, that's battery management. That thing is the heart.
So you
of the
burn
entire
on
system.
BMS,
Yeah. So it produces the 240 volt grid. It instructs with the grid frequency the solar inverters to either produce power or back off a bit. Basically, when the battery needs charging, it lowers the grid frequency. The solar inverters jack up their output, and it charges the battery using that power. So it's a two-way street. It's an inverter, but it's also a battery management. It's a nice piece of gear. I really would like one that does lithium. It's only designed for lead acid, although it does. Its charge regimes are programmable, so I might be able to set it up for lithium. But balance charging and all this other stuff you need to do with lithium batteries. I've followed a lot of people who have taken 18650 cells and built this massive, great font
You can get some similar to the lithium iron phosphate, similar to that.
Yeah, the LifePo, yeah.
Big ones, yeah.
Yeah, they're
pretty good.
I mean, when I put this system in, I could have used LifePo because they were around.
Yeah.
But they were
They cost you about
significantly
6
more
times as
expensive.
much.
Yeah. I think when I looked at them, they were at 25 grand versus 15 grand. You know, and when I'm paying for this out of my own pocket, like 10 grand that's a shitload of money that I don't have to spend.
So what controls the diesel generator going on and off?
That's the yellow inverter as well.
Okay. So you'll set that, you know, when it hits 50%, turn the generator on.
60. Yeah.
Yeah, 60%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's pretty clever too because it will also bring the generator in when there's excessive load. So when, for example, if I turn a kettle, a toaster, and you know an angle grinder and a paint stripper and you know
and
all
you
these, and I'm if I turn lots of loads on, if I'm drawing on about 6 kilowatts, that's a 6 kilowatt inverter, right? That's what it will produce. It will peak to more than that in short periods. So if there's any excessive load, it'll try and get power from somewhere else and it will start generating. And the genset's a 7 kilowatt genset, so you know, I could run an arc welder if I really wanted to, but
You know you want one.
you know, I want a TIG welder. Yeah. Anyway, that's another story.
Cool.
Any other questions? Other than the pizzas are here?
Everyone, once again, thanks Simon.
Thank you, Simon.